Eubie Blake wrote the show Shuffle Along, the first all-black hit show on Broadway. It opened in 1921, 100 years ago exactly. Langston Hughes called it the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. There's something, I don't know, I'm a little superstitious or something, but here we are, exactly 100 years later, and reimagining that piece. If you listen to the original cast recording, it's like a, jazz hands bottle. I really wanted to honor the side of him that also had roots in the classical tradition.
This is Michael Christie, music director of the new West Symphony, joined by pianist Lara Downes, joining us for performances in Thousand Oaks and Camarillo, November 2nd and 3rd. Lara, it's been a few years since we were working together during the COVID lockdowns. We had an amazing time learning a little bit more about Margaret Bonds. We started talking about Eubie Blake, and have little parts of that conversation continuing in our upcoming performances.
It's been, it seems like forever, right? Such a different time. But we had such a great time together. Also, you guys did such an amazing job during the pandemic, not only of keeping the music going, but of even expanding what you were doing and the storytelling around it. I was really impressed and moved.
It was fun actually going back and looking at some of the recordings that we made, the interviews that we did during that time, and somehow through the craziness of all of it, I was just happy that everybody seemed so relaxed. Maybe because I think we were probably a solid 15 months into it, and I think we had all kind of done various iterations of those kinds of things. But yeah, our team did a great job and captured some absolutely riveting performances. You and Ashley Fatolia, amazing tenor, recorded some Margaret Bond songs, which was really very special. So it's going to be wonderful to welcome you back and having an audience,
Yes.
with you, which is really amazing. So the program that we've asked you to play is spanning about 100 plus years of American music, Scott Joplin being the earliest, then Eubie Blake, and then very, very recent Grammy award-winning work by Jessie Montgomery. So what is this American music that we speak of? What is this genre, given all the experience you've had now just covering so much of it?
I have to say, I find myself saying all the time, it's really hard to describe American music, but you know it when you hear it, And I think that the thing that's so unique about it, especially, those composers that you mentioned, but also so many other composers that you and I both love and know, there is this really unique way of blending traditions, blending sounds, which means blending histories here in this country and the music that's produced here. And I think the reason that I'm so fascinated and by it and possibly obsessed with it is that it really it never ends. The connections, the unexpected connections that you can find. And those connections have such deep implications in our very short history as a country, because I think we tend to think of ourselves as, divided in many ways, always, now, but always. And the music for me is this living proof that our stories are all commingled, our experiences and our journeys and our histories. So that's what I love about it. And, it sounds like that. It just sounds so familiar. I think when I first came to American music, that's the thing that grabbed me. It was just like, oh, this sounds like home, and why is that?
So when you're playing music of Mozart, Bach, for example, and then you go back to Florence Price or some of the other composers that you are notably connected to now, what's what's the conversation that happens between all these composers?
Yeah, I love that question. And it's a different kind of home, right? Classical music has been my home since I was 4 years old. So there's a deep comfort with that. But I think when we talk about American music, you just mentioned Florence Price, but anyone you can think of, from Aaron Copland and George Gershwin to Florence Price and the composers that are on our program in November, there are also roots back to Bach and Mozart, right? So for me, as an artist, kind of bringing all my worlds together, I think that's an interesting place, maybe where we are right now. I think that this very new, really, information and understanding about American music has kind of kept us rooted in this country. And now I think we're able to explore the roots and the routes backwards from American born music to understand even where it comes from across the oceans and across continents and centuries. And I think that all of the work that I do is American music, which really does have to do with the human stories, the human experiences, the human journeys, has helped me connect with the music of, do we want to call it the canon, in a different way. I no longer experience that as something rarefied and born of genius and, museum worthy. I really experience it as just, that's just more people, right? That's just more human stories,
Yeah.
perhaps longer ago, perhaps longer, farther away. But really, this is a family of musicians that goes all the way back, and we are always talking to each other.
And I think we're just more open to accepting that polkas came to Mexico and then that transformed into this. This kind of chorale came from Africa that went through Cuba. And I mean, there are all these different connections that I think we were taught about during music history lessons when we were in school, but now
Yeah.
somehow it's become much more tangible, uh,
Yes.
aesthetic.
That's so well said. And it meant nothing. I mean, I don't know about you. To me, it meant nothing. It was like another thing you had to remember. Now, to me, it means everything, because maybe just because you and I are living in this work and this life. And so it's really personally meaningful to understand all the places where we are connected to our ancestors of all kinds.
So the program that you're going to be playing with New West Symphony incorporates two rags of Scott Joplin. We have a beautiful piece by U.B. Blake from his musical Shuffle Along, and then we have Jessie Montgomery's Rounds. So as I asked before about how Mozart and Bach speak to American composers, do you feel like these composers over 110, 20 years on our program, Joplin, Blake, and Montgomery, do they speak to each other? And do you think about that when you're performing it?
I do. I do. I mean, I think, the thing that people don't know about Scott Joplin is how deep his roots were in classical music. So there's that. And that certainly impacts the way that I consider his music and play his music, and the way that these arrangements were done, even. I really want to amplify that part of his music making. And I think there's something important and tangible too about the reasons why his music took the turns that it did. He grew up in Texarkana, before the turn of the 20th century, and happened to find his way as a very young boy to this Jewish immigrant, German Jewish immigrant musician who had also ended up there, by weird circumstances, who taught him classical music. And as we know, his great ambition was to write the first great African American opera, which was a thwarted ambition. But even though he found his success in this evolution of this new form called ragtime, the classical meaning in it, the classical roots in it, are so deep. So there's that. And I think that UB Blake too has some of that to his music. And certainly the way that this arrangement of the song from Shuffle Along was done for me is definitely engaging with the classical, romantic, lyrical roots in his music making. What we're going to play sounds nothing like the original cast performance of
Right.
Shuffle Along.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that again, this is a question of lineage and legacy. And UB Blake's existence was not that long after Joplin's, but things had changed so radically because of the Great Migration and shifts in American culture in those very few years in between. And then just Jessie Montgomery comes into the world, you know, in our time, and her music making is so free. And I think she's maybe coming to things almost from the other end of the road, even though her childhood and her young life in New York City was very fluid and very full of all kinds of music, and her writing reflects that. But her origins as a violinist were steeped in the European tradition and that rigor. So I think that she's kind of expanding towards a more um, American idiom as she progresses as a composer. I remember when I first started learning the piece, I texted Jessie and I said, "This is just so well written," which is really not always the case, especially for piano music. And Jessie is not a pianist, but it's written in such a gratifying way that, it's physically comfortable and fun to play. And it really allows for a lot of range of expression.
I find that rounds, it does spin, but it doesn't spin like a fury. It just feels like it's delicately traversing a space, but it's not colliding with anything. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
breath to it, which I think is really lovely. One of the things that I've really enjoyed getting to know you in your music making is your curatorial approach, not only to your
Mm.
albums, which are just so bursting with surprises as you go through from track to track, but also your live music programs. And I'm just thinking, because I also really enjoy that the challenge of getting the listener from point A to point Z and doing that through music, doing that through context, doing that through various other artistic influences. So I'm just thinking about what are the touchstones that you like to incorporate into your programming, whether it's for your albums or your live performances for people.
Yeah, I mean, you're great at it too. And I think we have very much the same approach. And I think there are different levels at which I engage with curation. I would say that most of the time it's story based, whether that's an overt story about America or something that's, more about um, mood or color or, whatever human experience. I think that's generally the connection that I'm finding between the pieces. Um, but something that's been really on my mind, and I think that you think about this too, there are these two words that I think we tend to use a lot when we're talking about programming. We use the word engagement and we use the word education. I'm thinking a lot about another word that starts with E, which is experience. And
Hmm.
I think that my approach to curation and yours as well is really about creating an experience for the listener and for me together in community during the time that we're in the room and also afterwards. What are we feeling? What are we learning? What new connections are we forming? How are we communicating? And how do we take that with us? And how does that, inform where we go when we leave the theater? And I think that there are subtle ways of doing that. I'm not even sure that it's always conscious, but there are sound worlds. There are just sort of these threads of expression. And what I love about curation is that it can take you, the curator, into so many unexpected territories, right?
I think it's really important that we don't underestimate the audience when it comes to people's curiosity. They've
Yeah.
invested this time to come and spend with us. Sometimes they will not know us from Adam. Sometimes they will have been with you for various other concerts. So how do you balance the curatorial approach for somebody who has no background in the message that you are trying to convey when
Mhm.
in the same performance you have people who are completely steeped in it?
Oh, well, because I'm a little bit cautious of the education word. I don't want anyone to really feel that they are being educated. I want them to feel that they are experiencing. So it doesn't matter if you know everything or, as much as you think you can know about a piece of music or nothing, because I think you're always entering through the sound world. That's the portal, I hope.
Well, Laura Downes, thank you so very much. We can't wait to have you back in Ventura County. I know you spend a lot of time with our KUSC fans, the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, but we're very, very grateful and proud of the relationship that we have with you, and hope the people come and enjoy this 100+ years of American music that you're bringing to our stage November 2nd and 3rd in Thousand Oaks and Camarillo, newwestsymphony.org.
Can't wait to join you again. Thanks. And this has been such a fun conversation.
Thank you.